Tonight we slip off our sandals and step inside the clammy embrace of a Roman therme. Just try not to pass out from the heat. It starts with a scent: earthy stone, sun-baked sweat, faint traces of incense, and something vaguely metallic. You're standing at the threshold of the therme, one of Rome's grandest public bathhouses. Marble columns soar above you, their cool elegance sharply contrasting the thick, humid air curling around your ankles. Voices echo from deep within the complex, some in laughter, others in drunken slurs, and a few in what sounds suspiciously like philosophy. A slave nods curtly at you. He gestures toward the entrance, not with welcome, but with expectation. No turning back now. You step into the first chamber and feel it immediately. The oppressive wet heat that clings to your skin like a living thing. The floors are warm underfoot, the walls sweating alongside you. You haven't even begun, and already your hairline is glistening. This isn't relaxation. This is a test of survival. The design is no accident. Roman architects engineered these spaces like puzzle boxes of pleasure and punishment. Hot air surges from the hypocaust beneath your feet. An ancient central heating system so sophisticated, modern engineers still raise eyebrows. But while they admire the tech, they also wonder just how often it malfunctioned. One misstep in pressure, and you'd roast more than just your toes.
The therme is more than a bathhouse. It's a social arena, a daily ritual, a political theater. But for you, suddenly hyper-aware of your body, your breath, your rapidly fogging vision, it's a gladiatorial arena of steam.
You glance up at the ceiling. It's vaulted and painted, and parts of it glisten with condensation. Drops of water fall like clockwork onto the marble floor, making faint plinking sounds. This moisture is from human heat, not rain. You're already beginning to wonder if you're hallucinating the smell of grilled fish, or if someone brought lunch into the bath again.
The entire structure hums like a living creature. The aqueducts bring in fresh water constantly, feeding the pools in a carefully balanced cycle. Cold from one side, boiling from the other. The balancing act is handled by the balneatores, bathhouse workers who juggle temperatures like Michelin-starred chefs adjusting a sauce. You shuffle forward, your sandals sticking slightly to the wet marble. The air thickens as you pass into the apoditerium, the changing room. The temperature hasn't even peaked yet. This is just the overture. Roman poet Martial once mocked the bathhouse crowds in his epigrams, painting them as chaotic, dirty, and occasionally disgusting. But you're beginning to think he was being kind, because as another drop of sweat rolls down your spine, and you spot a particularly hairy man toweling off with something that looks like horsehair, you realize you're completely out of your element. Einem Stream history books tell us the Roman bathhouse was a marvel of civilization. Hygienic, advanced, elegant. And yes, it was all of that. But the part they forget to mention is that the experience was more brutal than blissful. Inscriptions on ancient walls even include curses about people stealing towels, or warnings not to linger too long in the steam room unless you fancy a nosebleed. One quirky tidbit that rarely makes it into museums: Some emperors were known to bathe up to 8 times a day. Caligula reportedly preferred his caldarium scalding enough to kill eels. Imagine being the guy testing that water with your elbow. Historians still argue whether the intense heat was genuinely therapeutic or just a way to one-up your peers in suffering. After all, if the senator next to you could withstand another 5 minutes in the hot room, were you even Roman? Already you're feeling dizzy. The light wavers, and the buzz in your ears grows louder. You try to steady your breath, but it's like inhaling through a damp wool cloak, and you're only in the first room. Your tunic is damp, your dignity is flaking, and somewhere deeper in the bathhouse, a slave is sharpening a bronze scraper. So, before we proceed, just ask yourself, have you ever truly earned your sweat? You're now stripped bare, surrounded by strangers, and trying to pretend this is totally normal. Because in ancient Rome, it was. The appetiterium greets you like a punch in the ego. The changing room is massive, echoing with chatter, grunts, and the occasional shout of someone discovering their sandals are missing. Around you, marble benches line the walls, and rows of cubbyholes, if we're being generous with the term, hold loosely folded togas, belts, and personal effects. Most of the belongings are under the watchful eyes of slaves called capsari, attendants tasked with guarding clothing. But let's be honest, theft is rampant. So unless your slave is particularly burly or bribed well, don't count on leaving with everything you came in with. And now, the awkward bit. You undress. Completely. There's no curtain, no screen, no spa robe with the embroidered logo. Just you, a chilly breeze despite the sweltering room, and 50 other Romans who seem disturbingly unfazed by your nudity. You try to stand casually, maybe pose like one of those statues you saw on the way in. One hand on your hip? No, too aggressive. Both hands behind your back. Now you look like you're hiding something. You settle for the classic clutching your elbow while looking at the floor stance. Timeless. Around you, the crowd is a cross-section of Roman life. There's the older patrician carefully folding his tunic with the dignity of a senator preparing for debate. 2 young men are wrestling each other for no reason. A father instructs his son on how to store sandals high enough so thieves can't snatch them with a stick. And nearby, someone is using a piece of broken pottery to scrape calluses off his heel. You make a mental note not to sit near him later. You wonder briefly how much eye contact is too much. Turns out there's no clear answer. A Roman bathhouse is, after all, more than a place to get clean. It's a stage. Here people observe, gossip, flirt, conspire. In fact, many business deals were struck in the nude, which to modern ears sounds like a line from a very niche startup pitch meeting. And yes, nudity is mandatory. Wearing anything in the bath itself could spark suspicion or worse, derision. Roman culture equated public bathing with equality, a leveling of status, however temporarily. You may be a senator or a sandal maker, but once you're naked and sweating, you're just another person trying not to faint in the caldarium. That said, there were exceptions. Some high-ranking individuals, especially paranoid emperors, were known to bring their own security or demand private hours. Emperor Hadrian reportedly preferred silence in the baths, which is hilarious considering the rest of Rome treated them like bustling marketplaces with extra moisture. But for regular folks like you, you're expected to strip down and blend in. As you try to tuck your belongings into a storage nook, a Capsarius eyes you warily. He grunts something about tip in advance and holds out a hand. You fumble a small coin, perhaps a quadrans, into his palm. He accepts it with the flair of someone receiving a senator's seal, then promptly turns away to argue with another patron. A mainstream historical fact you might appreciate. Bathhouses were generally free or cost only a nominal fee, cheaper than a loaf of bread. They were subsidized by wealthy elites looking to boost their popularity, which meant that even slaves and the poor could bathe. Of course, what bathing meant would soon stretch your definition beyond recognition. One fringe detail often missed. Some Romans wore jewelry into the baths, not for vanity, but for superstition, amulets to ward off the evil eye, particularly in such an exposed, vulnerable space. Imagine balancing spiritual protection with the risk of it slipping into a drain. You shuffle forward, trailing a line of moisture from your already sweating soles. Your body feels foreign under the gazes of others, yet strangely, you're beginning to see how this openness forces a kind of surrender. No hiding, no pretending, just your body, your breath, and the ritual ahead. Historians still argue whether this communal nudity served more as a bonding force or a subtle form of social control. After all, what better way to remind citizens of their place than to make them bear it all together, side by side? A horn sounds from deeper in the bathhouse, a low, hollow tone. You're unsure if it signals the next phase or just someone's echoing burp. Either way, it means movement. You take one last look at your tiny cubby. Try to memorize its exact location between two carved phalluses. Yes, really. And step into the next chamber. Already you feel yourself becoming less modern, less modest, more Roman. But don't get too cocky. The real heat is still ahead. Prepare for a violent exfoliation with a sharp bronze strigil, courtesy of a slave who's really not paid enough for this. You shuffle into the next room, greeted by a fresh wave of steam and the unmistakable sound of sloshing water, skin being slapped, and what might be muffled whimpering. Welcome to the unctuarium, the oiling and scraping station, where the Romans quite literally rubbed you down and peeled you like a grape. A slave steps forward, shirtless, hair tied back with a sweat-dampened strip of linen, and eyes that say, "I've seen things." In one hand, he holds a shallow bowl of olive oil, in the other, a strigil, a curved bronze blade with a hooked end. It gleams with the patina of repeated use and, worryingly, someone else's recent exfoliation. He gestures. You nod. There's no verbal exchange, only the grim understanding that you're about to lose the top layer of your epidermis. The oil goes on first. Lukewarm, thick, and not entirely free of sediment. It smells faintly of herbs and something sour. The slave slathers it over your chest, shoulders, and limbs with the detached efficiency of someone buttering bread for 100th time. The oil isn't for moisture, it's for dirt, a kind of ancient soap substitute that traps grime so it can be scraped off later like old paint. Then comes the strigil. With a swift motion, the blade rakes across your skin, dragging oil, sweat, and dead cells into sticky ribbons. You flinch. He doesn't. He's done this 1,000 times, and frankly, he has a schedule to keep. The pressure is assertive. This isn't the gentle loofah treatment you might expect from a spa. It's more like medieval car detailing. You grit your teeth as the tool scrapes down your back, across your calves, under your arms. And yes, they get everywhere. Romans believed a good scrape was essential not just for cleanliness, but for health. Apparently, having intact skin was optional. One mainstream fact: the strigil was a daily tool for bathers, athletes, and soldiers alike. Often made of bronze or iron, some were ornately engraved and personalized, because what better gift than your very own body-scraping hook? You glance around. Other patrons are mid-scrape, oil glistening under torchlight. A few chat casually as if they aren't being skinned alive. A man nearby sneezes, and someone blesses him while continuing to exfoliate their thigh. There's a sort of ritualistic trance to it all. And believe it or not, this was considered the refreshing part. One fringe tidbit? Roman bathhouses often sold the scrapings, yes, the sludgy mixture of sweat, oil, and skin cells, to apothecaries. Wealthy women sometimes used it in face creams or believed it held medicinal value. That gunk you're trying not to slip on? Someone's luxury skincare. You start to notice the buckets, lined up along the wall, filled with grayish fluid and reeking faintly of mildew. Slaves dip their strigils in these between patrons, swish, swish, then go right back to the next body. There's no such thing as sanitization. This is a communal ecosystem of oils and germs. Your immune system either gets stronger or throws in the towel. You suppress a shudder as your scraper moves to your feet. Calloused, cracked, stained with street dust. Roman streets were no picnic, and you've walked them in thin leather sandals, dodging refuse and the occasional donkey gift. The slave tuts at the state of your heels, scrapes harder, and mutters something about urban filth. Historians still argue whether this ritual was truly about hygiene or just another form of performance. Was the bathhouse a space for genuine cleansing, or more of a social theater where appearing clean mattered more than being clean? After all, a daily layer of sweat and oil was just part of the Roman aesthetic. You try to breathe, but the air is thick with body heat, torch smoke, and oil fumes. Somewhere behind you a man grunts, perhaps from pain or enlightenment. Another laughs, high-pitched and exhausted. There's a strange camaraderie here. Shared suffering has a way of uniting people. The slave finishes with a final flick of the strigil across your shoulders. He gestures toward a nearby bench, a signal that you're done. You nod, skin tingling, and shuffle away, slick and slightly violated. You pass another patron refusing the strigil treatment. His slave pleads. He waves him off, choosing instead to apply oil with delicate pats and wander to the next chamber unscraped. Brave man. Foolish, but brave. As you sit, you realize you're coated in a thin sheen of oil and sweat, but strangely lighter. The grime of the street, the stress of the forum, even the stubborn residue of yesterday's argument with your neighbor about stolen figs, all scraped away. You're raw, gleaming and ready. But for what you don't yet know, because this was just the preparation. The real bath is next. You lie on a warm marble bench, sweating like a gladiator in July, pretending this lukewarm purgatory is relaxing. The tepidarium welcomes you like a strange, sweaty hug. It's the transitional room, the warm bath, the middle child between the icy plunge and the boiling stew of what's to come. But don't let the name fool you. Tepid in Roman terms still means hot enough to roast a lark on the tile floor. You ease yourself onto a marble bench that looks smooth but manages to find every tender spot on your backside. It's been sun-warmed from hours of bathers' bodies, and as you sit, you instantly begin to slide. You shift, adjust, try again. Finally, you surrender to the fact that you're going to sit like a melting statue and hope no one notices the squeaking sound your skin makes against the polished stone. The room is filled with a low murmur of conversation. It bounces off the arched ceiling in waves, echoing like distant bees in a barrel. The marble walls, glazed with moisture, shimmer in torchlight. You stare at the ceiling. There's a painted frieze up there, gods cavorting with mortals maybe, or possibly just someone's very ambitious attempt at mythological erotica. Either way, it's a distraction from the fact that you are, once again, soaking wet. The air here is thick, not as scalding as the caldarium ahead, but dense enough to fog your thoughts. It's meant to open your pores, a prelude to the real sweat fest. You breathe in slowly, hoping to find some calm. Instead, you get a noseful of mineral-laced steam and old olive oil. A small slave boy shuffles past, carrying a jar of scented resin, possibly frankincense or maybe just pine tar. He sprinkles a bit onto a nearby brazier, and a light puff of sweet-smelling smoke curls into the air. The scent is oddly comforting, like burnt oranges and forgotten temples. Mainstream historians tell us the tepidarium was the centerpiece of Roman bathing culture. It was architecturally elaborate, domed roofs, mosaic floors, and sophisticated heating systems that regulated temperature through hot air ducts in the walls and floor. This was the room where people lingered the longest, Here they weren't boiling or freezing, just lightly braised. Across from you, a portly man chuckles at a joke you didn't hear. His belly jiggles. He leans back, arms splayed wide, as if conducting the steam. A younger man beside him appears to be reciting poetry or love letters or both. Their voices blend with the hiss of hot coals, forming an odd kind of lullaby. One quirky detail you'd never guess. Some Romans brought food into the tepidarium. Small snacks, figs, dates, cheese. Imagine sitting beside someone gnawing on goat cheese while you're trying not to pass out from heat stroke. It wasn't just tolerated, it was fashionable. Bathing was a leisurely affair, often lasting several hours. Why not make it a picnic? You lean back, press your shoulder blades against the warm marble, and try to pretend you're enjoying this. The sweat clings to your eyelashes, trickles down your ribs, and pools in places you'd rather not think about. You close your eyes for a moment, your skin is buzzing, your thoughts drift. This might actually be relaxing, if not for the persistent itch forming where that strigil got a little too enthusiastic. A sharp crack of laughter jolts you back. Someone's telling a story, probably embellished, definitely inappropriate. You catch fragments, something about a lost sandal, a jealous wife, and a very confused donkey. Welcome to Roman small talk. Historians still argue whether the tepidarium's main purpose was physical or social. Was it just a thermal transition room to protect your body from temperature shock? Or was it a space designed for gossip, alliance-making, and low-stakes seduction? There's evidence for both. Letters and graffiti point to plenty of whispered conversations that later shaped Senate votes or scandalous poems. The real debate, though, is how much the average Roman genuinely enjoyed this. Were they here for the health benefits, the social ritual, or just because it was what everyone did? You're starting to suspect it was all of the above, and possibly none of it. Another puff of fragrant smoke curls into your nostrils. Someone passes you a damp cloth. You dab at your brow, then immediately regret it as the cloth smells faintly of last week's feet. You discreetly return it and pretend nothing happened. A balneator, a bathhouse attendant, walks by, adjusting the flame on one of the brass braziers. He gives you a look, not a cruel one, just a knowing glance. You're sweating buckets, visibly uncertain, and probably 2 shades redder than when you arrived. He's seen it 100 times. You're not the first outsider to wilt in the tepidarium, and you won't be the last. A bell sounds softly in the distance. Not an alarm, not a command, just a gentle chime to signal the shifting of hours. The caldarium waits. You rise slowly. Muscles loose but legs wobbly. The bench sighs with you. You nod at the man with the poetry, who raises a fig in salute, and with that, you prepare to trade warm mist for boiling fog. Time to broil alive in a steam room hotter than your air fryer. Historians still argue whether Romans used eucalyptus oils or just pure masochism. The doorway to the caldarium looms ahead like the gate to some sweltering underworld. There's no dramatic signage, no warning label, just a heavy curtain of air so humid and hot it hits you like a wool blanket fresh from an inferno. You hesitate for a heartbeat, then step through. Instantly, your lungs tighten. The steam clings to your face, seeping into your pores like it's trying to live there. Visibility drops. You can just make out shadowy figures reclining on stone benches, their outlines hazy through the dense fog. The entire room seems to pulsate with heat. Your feet are already protesting against the scorching marble beneath them. This is the caldarium, the hottest chamber in the Roman bathhouse experience. And unlike modern saunas, which encourage you to meditate in silence and maybe sip cucumber water, the caldarium wants you to sit there and suffer. Gleefully, you move cautiously toward one of the benches, testing it first with your hand. Big mistake. The stone surface is searing. You hiss involuntarily and hear a chuckle from somewhere in the mist. Someone finds your pain amusing. Typical Roman hospitality. Eventually, you find a spot near a steaming bronze basin. Hot water drips into it from a pipe connected directly to the furnace below. The hypocaust system is in full rage here. Slaves beneath the floor stoke fires all day to keep this room smoldering, an architectural miracle and a laborer's nightmare. You briefly imagine them below, shirtless and blackened with soot, working in shifts to keep your pores open and your eyebrows nearly singed. You lie down, cautiously, on a slab of stone that's only slightly less hot than the sun. Your skin sticks, your joints ache, and the moment you relax, the sweat begins to pour in earnest, like someone turned on a tap at the base of your neck. A man next to you sighs deeply, more steam than breath. His body glistens. He lazily reaches over to ladle hot water over his chest from a basin, and it rolls off him like he's some sort of mythological roast. A few feet away, someone is rhythmically slapping their arms and chest, either to stimulate circulation or because they've gone slightly mad. Here's a mainstream historical gem. The caldarium could reach upwards of 120 degrees Fahrenheit or more, depending on how zealous the attendants were with the firewood that day. This wasn't just warm and cozy, it was engineered heat stress. Romans believed that sweating purged bad humors, toxins, and bad moods. You, on the other hand, are beginning to hallucinate your childhood dog whispering to you through the vapor. Someone passes you a hollowed-out gourd. You take it, because why not, and sip the slightly tangy infusion of herbs and mineral water. It's both refreshing and confusing, like if Pedialyte had a baby with a Caesar salad. But it does help. Slightly. One quirky tidbit. Wealthier Romans sometimes added eucalyptus or bay leaf oils to the steam, believing it aided breathing and scented the air. Some even imported exotic fragrances, myrrh, cinnamon, resin, so the caldarium smelled like an over-perfumed bakery. Though here, all you smell is heat, sweat, and faintly singed olive oil. You glance around again. The room has niches in the wall where people store sponges or cups or, in one case, a small statue of Bacchus holding grapes. It's unclear whether it's decorative or someone's bathhouse mascot. Either way, he seems pleased. And still, you sweat. Sweat from your brow, your elbows, your earlobes, places you didn't even know could sweat. Your pulse thumps in your temples. You are, in every way, dissolving. The person next to you groans softly, which somehow makes you feel better. Misery, meet company. Historians still argue whether the caldarium was a medically effective detox tool or just a socially acceptable way to roast oneself while pretending it was healthy. There are accounts of people fainting, even dying in overheated baths, though some scholars say those may have been embellished warnings for the frail and overambitious. You try to adjust your position, but your fingers are pruny and your skin is starting to feel like it's being slowly parboiled. A nearby bathgoer mutters something in Latin, likely a poetic complaint about the heat, and then dumps cold water over his head from a bucket. You stare. He stares back. He shrugs. You do the same. Bucket. Water. Overhead. You yelp. The shock is staggering, but it somehow resets your brain. You sit there, shivering despite the heat, and finally, bizarrely, begin to understand the appeal. It's not just about sweat. It's about survival. You emerge from this molten fog feeling reborn, like you've been forged in the same fires that built the empire. But then, of course, the heat returns. The steam wraps around you again. The spell breaks. You glance toward the exit. You've had enough. Your body is liquid, your thoughts are soup, and your dignity is dangling by a thread. It's time to crawl toward the cold. And the Romans? They'd just be getting started. Between gossiping senators and stumbling drunks, the bathhouse is less spa and more political pit fight in a sauna. You stagger out of the caldarium, skin flushed, heart racing, your entire being feeling like a wine-soaked towel wrung dry. For For a moment, you lean against the cool wall just outside the steam chamber, trying to remember your own name. Your fingers tremble, your knees wobble, and yet you're still standing. Barely. Before you can recover, you're swept into the current of bathhouse politics. The next room, a sort of wide-open atrium near the tepidarium, is less about heat and more about heat of conversation. This is where people come to talk. Not whisper, mind you, talk, loudly, passionately, often with gestures that slosh water onto unfortunate bystanders. You step into this human tide and are immediately jostled to the side by a sweaty elbow and a half-hearted apology. All around, men stand in clusters, some half-wrapped in towels, others gloriously naked and unbothered. Voices rise in argument. Laughter erupts over a clever insult. A patrician claps a freedman on the back with exaggerated familiarity, then immediately wipes his hand on a nearby slave. The air buzzes with overlapping conversations about law, love, gladiator match results, and why the fish sauce in the forum has tasted strange lately. You try to keep a low profile, but it's impossible. A stranger offers you a fig, then launches into a rant about the grain shortage. Another tries to rope you into a wager over an upcoming chariot race. You politely decline and inch away, only to back directly into a minor magistrate holding court with two drunken poets. A mainstream historical fact. Roman bathhouses were hubs of social life. Places where senators struck deals, philosophers lectured, and ordinary citizens aired grievances. Cicero supposedly once argued a legal case while being scrubbed, and the Emperor Hadrian was known to host impromptu policy chats mid-sweat. Think of it as a town hall wrapped in a towel, with body odor and olive oil. But this wasn't just about governance. This was theater. Every nod, every raised brow, every accidental name drop of a connection in the Senate, it was all part of the performance. You're beginning to understand that even standing in silence here is a political act. Stay too quiet, and someone assumes you're listening for blackmail fodder. Just as you're trying to slip past a loud debate about the ethics of lion taming, two men nearly collide in front of you, one clutching a clay jug of wine, the other wrapped in what can only be described as an aggressively sheer towel. They lock eyes, voices rise, a splash of wine hits the floor. You inch backward, watching what might become a brawl or a drunken embrace. Instead, it turns into a shoving match. A nearby Capsarius rushes in, not to break it up, but to snatch the jug before it spills any further. You catch the scent, fermented grapes and a hint of pine reses. Roman wine, unfiltered and strong enough to knock the sandals off a centurion. One of the bathers tries to swing a fist but slips on a puddle and lands, hilariously, on a sponge. The crowd laughs. You do too, but nervously. One quirky detail: it wasn't uncommon for people to bring alcohol into the bathhouse, or to bribe attendants to fetch it. Some bathhouses even had built-in taverns. This led to a heady mix of intoxication, heat exhaustion, and ego. A perfect recipe for both merriment and mild chaos. You shuffle past a group playing dice with loud exclamations. Gambling in the baths? Technically illegal. Enforced? Rarely. You watch coins clatter on the marble floor, a slave scurrying after one that's rolled dangerously close to a drain. Somewhere behind you, someone starts reciting poetry. Ovid, by the sound of it. Probably the same Ovid who was exiled for his scandalous verses. The delivery is surprisingly good, but it's hard to appreciate the meter when someone nearby is loudly belching between verses. Historians still argue whether this bathhouse bustle helped unify Roman society or sowed the seeds of its stratification. Was this shared public space truly democratic? Or did it just reinforce who had power by showing who could afford to not care how they looked soaking wet and oiled up? You, meanwhile, are trying not to trip over a discarded sponge. You pass under a small archway and find yourself in a quieter corner. Here an older man sits cross-legged, meditating, or possibly napping, with a sponge on his head like a squishy laurel wreath. A younger man nearby reads a scroll, mouthing the words silently while dabbing sweat from his lip with a silk cloth. You nod at them both. They ignore you entirely. It's peaceful for 3 whole seconds. Then a boy runs through laughing, chased by a stern-faced woman in a linen wrap, shouting something about, "No cannonballs in the frigidarium." You sigh. It's like a marketplace, a senate floor, and a family reunion all pressed into a damp, echoey sauna. You begin moving again. Time to find somewhere quieter. Somewhere you can sit, maybe breathe, maybe exist. Somewhere without flying figs and political gossip. But first, don't forget to look down. Someone's dropped a fig right in the path of your foot. Too late. You slip. Catch yourself just in time and hear a slave mutter something that probably translates to amateurs. A random guy starts poking your rash and offering wine enemas. Roman medicine was equal parts guesswork and goat's milk. Just when you think things can't get any weirder, you feel a gentle tap on your shoulder. You turn to find a wiry man in his late 50s, draped in a damp woolen wrap that's clinging to all the wrong places. He has a scroll tucked under one arm, a small bronze mirror in the other, and a facial expression hovering between intense interest and mild disappointment. "You look pale," he says. You open your mouth to reply, but before you can utter a syllable, he squints and pokes the side of your neck. Not maliciously, more like someone inspecting produce. Then he nods knowingly and steps aside, revealing a small crate full of vials, herbs, and things that definitely weren't FDA approved. "I'm a physician," he adds, as if that explains everything. Of course he is. In Roman bathhouses, it wasn't uncommon to stumble upon someone practicing medicina publica. These were state-appointed or privately operating doctors who offered treatments, advice, and sometimes just unsolicited opinions to bathgoers. And much like modern influencers with dubious credentials, they never missed a chance to promote their favorite miracle cure. You try to politely wave him off, but he's already rummaging through a pouch. "Goat's milk compress," he offers, holding up a small cloth bundle that smells like cheese and despair. Or perhaps a wine enema? Very cleansing, especially after a caldarium session. Flushes the bile. You blink at him. You didn't even tell him what was wrong. Or, he continues, undeterred, we could try humming to Saturn and placing hot ash on your lower back. Not conventional, but the results are shocking. You mumble something about already feeling better. He nods approvingly and presses a sprig of rue into your palm. Chew this if your thoughts feel crowded. You slowly back away. Mainstream historical fact. Roman physicians often worked in or around bathhouses. The heat was believed to help with diagnosis. Flushed skin revealed imbalances, and sweat patterns were observed like tea leaves. Galen, the famous physician whose work dominated Western medicine for centuries, often treated patients in these spaces. Of course, treatments included such delights as bloodletting, emetics, and the occasional application of goose fat. You're not entirely sure which part of your aura screamed medical emergency, but now you're clutching an herb and reevaluating all your life choices. A few steps later, you pass a group of bathers surrounding a man with a bandaged foot. He's propped it up on a small bronze stool while another man carefully applies what looks like mud. Possibly medicinal, possibly just mud. It's hard to say. The conversation around them is dead serious. Discussions of tendon damage, unlucky omens, and whether lunar cycles affect healing. You sidestep the impromptu clinic, only to run into a slave carrying a tray of medical instruments, tweezers, forceps, small scalpels, and, disturbingly, a hollow reed. You decide not to ask. One quirky tidbit? Roman physicians sometimes offered what we'd now call wellness packages at the baths, combinations of steam therapy, massage, herbal drinks, and minor procedures like lancing boils or straightening crooked toes. Some even marketed themselves with catchy slogans carved into bathhouse walls, advertising their success at treating everything from gout to heartbreak. You press on, trying to blend into the crowd, but the moment you start to relax, another bather sidles up to you, this one younger, with unnervingly bright eyes and a basket of leaves. "A Kalea," he says proudly. "Good for your joints. I rub it here." He gestures to his inner thigh. You nod, smile tightly, and walk away faster than dignity allows. Historians still argue whether the bathhouse served more as a legitimate medical hub or just a hotbed for speculative cures and placebo peddling. Yes, some treatments were effective. Roman surgeons could set bones and even perform rudimentary eye surgeries. But for every scientific success, there was also powdered mouse skull or a chant to Apollo. You find a quieter corner and sit on a low bench, trying to center yourself. Your head spins slightly, not from illness, but from sheer sensory overload. Around you, the steam continues to rise. The conversations swirl. The physicians hover like well-meaning vultures. You glance down at the rue still in your palm. It's damp now, slightly wilted. Do you chew it? You decide to wait, because knowing your luck, it's either an ancient anti-inflammatory or a powerful hallucinogen. And either way, there's still a lot of bathhouse left. You smear yourself with olive oil mixed with crocodile dung, because hey, it's what the cool emperors did. You're finally catching your breath when a squat, cheerful man with eyebrows like shrubbery appears beside you holding a clay jar. "Oleum mirabile," he says, smiling like a market hawker. Cleans, nourishes, repels insects, and makes you smell like the gods. You peer into the jar. It's a thick, greenish paste with an oily sheen and a distinctive aroma. Something between fresh basil and, well, something that recently died in the Nile. The man dips his fingers in and smears a dollop on his shoulder. He rubs it in with a satisfied groan, then gestures to you. You take a tentative sniff. That's when he delivers the punchline. "Crocodile dung, imported." You recoil. He shrugs. Antiseptic. Very fashionable. And unfortunately, he's not joking. Roman bathhouses were ground zero for health trends, and many Romans believed that crocodile excrement, often mixed with olive oil or crushed herbs, had curative powers, especially for the skin. If you're wincing now, imagine being the guy who had to harvest it. You thank him vaguely and sidle away before you become the next model in his scented dung campaign. The Romans had a complicated relationship with cleanliness and superstition. They believed in balance, especially the balance of humors, and that included balancing hot and cold, dry and moist, sacred and mildly revolting. You find a bench and notice others massaging various oils into their limbs with a reverence typically reserved for sacred rituals. One man is using what looks like sea salt mixed with lavender. Another is rubbing garlic-infused olive oil on his feet and muttering a prayer to Mercury, god of travelers. Yet another is applying a mixture of honey and ash to his elbows, whispering something about pleasing Venus. A mainstream fact: Roman bathers rarely used soap. Instead, they applied oil to the body and then scraped it off with a strigil. The oil trapped dirt and sweat, and the scraping removed both. This also allowed for mixing in herbs, perfumes, and apparently dung, because hygiene was as much about symbolism as sanitation. The wealthy took this a step further, employing slaves to massage their legs with rare oils imported from Arabia or Persia. One senator was said to have gone bankrupt trying to maintain his stock of Indian rose oil. Another commissioned a blend containing gold flakes, believing it would literally rub wealth into his skin. You spot a young couple nearby sharing a pot of something thick and yellow. They take turns daubing it on each other's forearms, laughing between applications. You catch a whiff, mustard seed and mint, oddly pleasant. The woman turns to you and offers a fingerful with a sly grin. You smile politely and decline. Barely. Then there's the man 2 benches over who's enthusiastically coating his chest with a tar-like substance, humming an off-key hymn to Apollo. You can't help but wonder what sort of celestial skincare that is. One quirky tidbit: Bathhouse attendants often made their own oil blends and competed for patrons. The best recipes became family secrets, passed down through generations. Some were even sold outside the bathhouses in little amphorae labeled with promises like "soft as Juno's cheeks" or "stops armpit rot in its tracks." You consider applying a small amount of plain oil, no honey, no garlic, no feces, just enough to blend in. You dab a bit on your arm and begin to rub it in, awkwardly mimicking the graceful motions of the more experienced bathers. Your skin glistens, your pores sigh, you feel oddly triumphant. Historians still argue whether these oiling rituals were more cosmetic, medicinal, or spiritual. Inscriptions and scrolls reference oiling as a sign of sophistication, while satirists like Juvenal mocked those who greased themselves for gossip and games. To some, it was just hygiene. To others, an identity. A slave approaches with a small flask and offers you a dab. You nod. He pours a few drops into your hand. The scent is earthy, smoky, cedar and something resinous. You rub it onto your chest. The heat from the room seems to activate it. It tingles, and for a moment, you feel less like an overheated tourist and more like a proper Roman. Sticky, oily, slightly confused, but in the club. You lie back against the bench, watching the haze drift past torchlight, the smell of herbs and humanity swirling around you. Maybe this is why people do it, not just for health, not for fashion, but for the strange satisfaction of being in the world, in the ritual, in the mix. You're slick, shimmering, and more than a little ridiculous. But hey, at least you didn't go for the crocodile dung yet. Yes, people ate in here, and burped, and occasionally fainted from the heat, or worse, let's just say don't sit near the drains. You smell it before you see it. Roasted chestnuts, spiced lentils, something fried, possibly fish, definitely fermented. And, unless your nostrils deceive you, a hint of honey-glazed locusts. That's right, it's snack time. You round a corner, still glistening with oil and regret, and find yourself in the Popinay alcove, a little refreshment nook tucked between the warm rooms and the cooler plunge pools. This isn't some refined cafe with harp music and dainty napkins. It's a steamy, chaotic buffet where half-naked people shovel food into their mouths while sweating profusely and occasionally dropping chickpeas into their lap folds. You scan the options. A brazier grills skewers of meat that look edible. There's a table covered in clay pots filled with pickled vegetables, dried fruits, salted fish, and some kind of pudding that jiggles ominously. Slaves weave between the patrons, offering trays of wine diluted with water, a Roman staple, and a few stronger drinks for those looking to combine heat stroke with inebriation. You blink, confused. Eating. In a bathhouse. Yes. Totally normal here. Mainstream history confirms it. Romans often ate during or between their bathing sessions. For the wealthy, a bath could last all afternoon, and nobody was expected to do that on an empty stomach. Some bathhouses even had formal dining rooms attached, complete with reclining couches and floor mosaics warning patrons to beware of fish bones. You cautiously accept a fig wrapped in cured meat from a smiling, sweaty stranger. It's warm, not because it was cooked, but because everything in this room is at least mildly simmering. You chew it slowly, your tongue struggling to decide if it's delighted or deeply alarmed. Someone next to you belches, loudly. The surrounding crowd doesn't even flinch. A slave offers you a cup of pasca, a tart, vinegary drink made of watered-down wine and herbs. You sip. It's refreshing and tastes like the ghost of a salad dressing. You nod in thanks, and he moves on, offering the same cup to the next man without even rinsing it. You're learning quickly. Personal space is optional. Sanitation is a suggestion, and germs are a myth yet to be invented. One quirky tidbit: Roman bathers were known to faint mid-meal, overheating, standing too quickly, or simply from the mix of wine and boiling humidity. Some bathhouses kept bundles of mint leaves or small pots of vinegar nearby for reviving patrons. Occasionally, someone would be dragged out by their ankles and left to air out before returning for dessert. You glance around and notice a man slumped against a wall, breathing heavily, a grape stuck to his chest. A nearby attendant fans him lazily with a woven palm frond. You make a mental note to drink more posca and less melted goat cheese. Historians still argue whether this mingling of food and sweat was viewed as indulgent or simply pragmatic. Some elite writers scorned the bathhouse diners as vulgar, belly worshippers, one moralist called them. But for many, the bathhouse wasn't just about cleansing, it was about pleasure. And pleasure to a Roman meant food. You hear a splash. Someone has dropped a fig into a pool. Another bather, undeterred, fishes it out with a spoon and eats it. You turn away before your stomach can start its own civil war. Then there's the smell. Let's not pretend all those olives and onions and unwashed undercarriages make for a delicate perfume. Add in the humid air, the animal fat oil on everyone's skin, and the occasional sulfuric waft from a hot spring vent, and you've got what might generously be called an immersive sensory experience. In the drains, oh, the drains. In the corners of every chamber, they gurgle faintly, little bronze mouths swallowing runoff water, oil, bits of food, and other things. Occasionally, one burps, releasing a puff of steam that smells like boiled regret. You edge away. One man near the wall is holding court, telling a story about a friend who dropped his ring into the drain and spent hours trying to fish it out with a ladle. He got it, the man boasts, but also a skin infection that looked like a Medusa's backside. Everyone laughs, except you. You finally find a spot to perch, on the edge of a low fountain. Warm to the touch and suspiciously sticky. You're too tired to care. A woman nearby offers you a date from a shared platter. You decline. She shrugs and pops two into her mouth, juice trailing down her chin. You lean back and sigh. Your stomach is full, your skin is coated in 5 types of oil, and your nose will never smell the same again. Somewhere a lute is playing, someone's reciting a riddle, another burp echoes from the corner, followed by a hiccup and the clatter of a dropped wine jug. You smile faintly. You've eaten in worse places, maybe. After boiling your brain, you're expected to dive into an ice-cold pool. Shock therapy, Roman edition. You shuffle forward like a sleepwalker, dazed from steam, stuffed with pickled onions, and glistening from every surface. Somewhere in the foggy haze of your senses, you hear the trickle of running water, cool, smooth, inviting. You round a corner and see it, the frigidarium, a stone chamber, quiet and dimly lit, housing a pool of still, pale blue water. It gleams under a high oculus, open to the sky, casting a soft spotlight over the water's glassy surface. The air here is thinner, cleaner. There's a sudden absence of body heat and onions. It feels sacred. You take a step inside and the temperature drops. Your overheated skin contracts instantly, goosebumps blooming like startled birds. The floor is no longer warm. It's cold, cold and damp and slightly slimy. You blink hard. Your body, still digesting that fig-wrapped mystery meat from earlier, wants to curl into a ball and roll back to the tepidarium. But you know what comes next. Everyone knows what comes next. The cold plunge. You inch toward the edge of the pool. A few others are already in, some floating lazily, others bracing against the wall, teeth clenched but faces serene. One man swims a slow lap with the calm grace of someone who no longer fears death. Another has just dunked his entire head under water and emerges gasping, laughing, blinking wildly like he's been reborn. You try not to think. You try to channel your inner stoic. You try to ignore the part of your brain that's yelling, "What are you doing?" Then, before you can back out, you step in, cold, cold like a dagger made of snow. cold that shoots up your legs and lodges behind your eyeballs. Your breath punches out of your lungs, your heart skips, your skin, moments ago a bubbling fondue, is now a frozen rind. You're in up to your waist before you can convince yourself to stop. And then, with a last gasp of pride, you lower the rest of your body, submerging to your shoulders. Every inch of you clenches. The silence in the frigidarium is different. No one talks loudly here. The air is too sharp, too clean. It demands quiet. People speak in whispers, if at all. Even the splash of water feels like a sacred intrusion. One mainstream historical fact. The cold plunge was believed to seal the pores after sweating out impurities. Romans thought it closed the body's defenses and locked in health. For you, it feels more like your soul is evacuating via your spine. You try to stay still. Your limbs float awkwardly in the chilly water. Someone swims past you with a smile that could mean, "You'll get used to it," or "I no longer feel feelings." Hard to say. And yet, something shifts. Your mind sharpens. Your head clears. The fatigue from the hot rooms vanishes like steam on a mirror. You feel alert, present, fully in your body again, even if your body is currently demanding wool blankets and a small fire. Nearby, a pair of bathers argue in hushed tones over whether cold plunges improve memory or circulation. One references Galen, the other just mutters, "Tell that to my nipples." Their debate is interrupted by a splash, someone cannonballing in, ignoring the unwritten rule of quiet. A few patrons glance over in disapproval. The water ripples gently. One quirky detail: some bathhouses added rose petals or crushed mint leaves to the frigidarium water, not for romance, though the effect was lovely, but to mask the faint metallic taste of the plumbing and keep insects away. Occasionally, a floating petal would land on your nose mid-swim, a floral surprise during your physiological trauma. Historians still argue whether this final cold shock was more symbolic or practical. Did it truly help the body recover from heat exposure, or was it more of a spiritual reset, a Roman ritual of renewal before re-entering society? Some suggest it was meant to humble you after indulgence. Others think it was just their version of a slap to the face. You drift a while longer. Your muscles, after the initial rebellion, now feel like heavy ropes, slack and satisfied. A calm spreads through you, curling in your chest, quieting that voice that told you this whole thing was madness. Eventually, you make your way to the steps and haul yourself out, water cascading down your legs in glistening sheets. You reach for a cloth to dry off, though it's barely more than a rag, and begin patting yourself down with trembling hands. You're cold. You're dripping. But you're awake. Fully, stubbornly alive. And somehow, you've survived the worst of it. Probably. Your coin pouch just vanished. A fight breaks out over towel space, and no one's wearing deodorant. You're drying off, or attempting to, with a cloth that feels like it was last laundered in 73 BCE, when you notice something strange. Your hip feels light, too light. You reach down, fingers scrabbling at the tie of your coin pouch. Except there's no tie, no pouch, no coins. You stare at your damp, empty side with the dawning realization that you've been robbed. In a towel, in a public bath, by someone probably also in a towel, possibly naked. The irony would be hilarious if your wallet wasn't now sloshing down some marble corridor in the hands of a particularly stealthy bather. You scan the crowd. Nothing but glistening bodies, tired eyes, and suspiciously smug expressions. There's no shouting, no commotion, just another Tuesday at the Thermae. Theft in Roman bathhouses wasn't just common, it was expected. Hence the often ignored wall inscriptions cursing thieving hands and promising the wrath of Jupiter on anyone who snatched a single denarius. You sigh. You were warned. You turn to a nearby Capsarius, the attendant who supposedly watches over clothes and valuables. He's half asleep, picking at his toenail with a hairpin. You clear your throat. He raises an eyebrow, shrugs with legendary indifference, and returns to his toes. Case closed. Before you can stew too long in your disappointment, a sudden shout erupts from across the room. Meus locus est, someone bellows. That's my spot. You look up just in time to see two men locked in a heated towel standoff. One is older, with a deeply tanned chest and the confidence of someone who's been coming here since Augustus was in diapers. The other is younger, wiry, and clearly not backing down. Their nose to nose, wet hair clinging to their foreheads, each clinging to a fraying strip of linen like it's a senator's sash. And then it happens. A shove, a splash, foot slipping on a rogue fig, chaos. They tumble to the ground with a wet thud, arms flailing, limbs tangling in a slapstick mess of elbows and indignation. A chorus of oohs and snickers ripples through the room. Someone in the back calls out bets in a sing-song voice. A towel goes flying, slapping a bystander directly in the face. Welcome to Bathhouse politics. Mainstream historians often paint Roman thermae as orderly civic centers, where citizens discussed law, philosophy, and the finer points of rhetoric. And sure, that happened. But so did this. A daily tangle of egos, body odor, and territorial disputes over who gets to sit near the warm vent. You edge away from the scuffle, only to walk straight into another assault on your senses. A wall of smell so pungent it feels like a physical slap. Nobody is wearing deodorant. It's not entirely their fault. The concept of deodorant as we know it hadn't been invented. Romans made do with scented oils, powders, or just good old-fashioned hope nobody notices. But here, in the post-sweat, post-oil, post-fish snack phase of the bath, the accumulated human aroma is formidable. You breathe shallowly. One quirky tidbit? Wealthier Romans sometimes carried little ivory spatulas to apply perfume directly to the armpits. Others wore scented medallions or amulets that dangled from their necks, essentially ancient air fresheners. Still, even the fanciest fragrances had to wrestle with hours of heat, humidity, and heartily seasoned lentils. As the skirmish dies down, no clear victor, just two puffing men separated by a vigilant slave wielding a ladle. You glance around for somewhere safe to stand. There is none. A group nearby has formed a tight circle around a game of tabula, a Roman precursor to backgammon. They're slapping down pieces with gusto, exchanging coins, insults, and wild hand gestures. You hear a reference to someone's mother being lower than a sponge boy. Gasps all around. Behind you, someone sneezes. Loudly. Twice. No one blesses him. Instead, a man tuts and shifts away, muttering about ill omens and last time this happened, the Tiber flooded. Historians still argue whether the bathhouse's barely contained chaos was a deliberate feature of social design. Was it a way for citizens to blow off steam, literally and figuratively, in a space that blurred class lines and public roles? Or was it simply the natural outcome of shoving sweaty, naked humans together with fermented fish juice and gambling? You, personally, are leaning toward the latter. Eventually, you find a quietish corner to regroup. You're poorer, possibly stinkier, but still standing. You wrap your towel a bit tighter, pull your shoulders back, and take a deep breath, then immediately regret it. Some baths were men only, others mixed, but not without scandal. Historians still argue if certain ladies' days were really just code. You're still recovering from the towel duel and the olfactory ambush when you step into a new chamber and everything shifts. It's quieter here. Not silent, but calmer. The marble floors are drier, the light is softer, and the voices are more measured. There's a different energy, a slower rhythm. You glance around and realize women, not many, but enough to make you pause. Draped loosely in light linens or nothing at all, they move with an ease that's noticeably different from the sweaty bravado of the male-dominated chambers. Some are seated in pairs, talking over cups of spiced water. Others recline beside the pools, massaging their arms or braiding each other's damp hair. The air smells faintly of rose and myrrh instead of garlic and despair, and no one is shouting. You step cautiously forward, unsure if you've wandered into forbidden territory or just discovered a rare species of bathhouse civility. Here's the twist. Roman bathhouse gender norms were anything but straightforward. Mainstream historical fact. Many bathhouses had separate facilities for men and women, or designated different hours for each. But there were also thermae with mixed bathing, especially in cosmopolitan cities like Rome and Pompeii. Whether or not this was considered scandalous depended on the era, the emperor, and how prudish your local magistrate happened to be. You settle onto a bench and try not to look conspicuous. A nearby woman eyes you warily, then returns to combing oil through her companion's hair with a fine-toothed ivory comb. You exhale slowly, trying to disappear into the steam. A trio of older women enters from a side door, wrapped in tunics damp with condensation. They speak quickly in sharp Latin, dissecting someone's marriage like it's a tragic play. One pauses to point out a young man across the room, something about his legs, his mother, and the way he eats figs. You look down and pretend to admire your toenails. One quirky tidbit. During certain periods, especially under emperors like Caracalla, mixed bathing was not just tolerated, it was advertised. Some bathhouses hosted special dies mixti, or mixed days, when men and women could bathe together. These days became infamous not just for the mingling, but for what went on beneath the surface. A whisper nearby floats through the steam. Something about Julia sneaking in after curfew and the baker's son. You glance up. No one meets your eye. Gossip is currency here, and you're bankrupt. Yet not everyone approved of these gender-fluid soak sessions. Historians still argue whether the scandalized senators who protested mixed bathing were genuinely concerned about public morality, or just annoyed that their wives were spending more time in the caldarium than at home. Some emperors banned it. Others built special side entrances for their mistresses. One even commissioned a private bath that allowed him to spy on bathers from behind a marble screen. Creepy? Yes, but also extremely Roman. A young woman nearby adjusts her wrap and catches you looking. She raises an eyebrow, not flirtatiously, but as if to say, "Really? First time?" You blush. She doesn't. You notice something else now. The art. The frescoes in this chamber are different from the usual heroics and mythic battles. These are softer. Venus rising from the sea, nymphs braiding each other's hair, cupids playing with mirrors. It's clear this space was designed with a different gaze in mind, and yet the same underlying rituals remain. Oil, water, chatter, judgment. One woman stands near a heated basin, dipping a cloth into the warm water and pressing it gently to her forehead. Another kneels to wash her ankles, humming a melody older than your understanding. A slave girl moves silently between them, refilling pitchers and plumping folded towels. You hear laughter now, light, musical, and somehow more cutting than anything you heard among the men. A joke, whispered and cruel, is passed along like a fig seed. You'll never know what it was, but it was clearly devastating. You shift uncomfortably on the bench, unsure whether you're a guest or a trespasser. This room, for all its serenity, carries its own power. A different kind of politics, less shouting, more subtle. One woman walks past you trailing rose-scented oil in a look that says, "Try not to slip on your own tongue, darling." You nod respectfully. She disappears into a misty doorway with the grace of someone who knows the bathhouse is her domain. You rise quietly, feeling the need to return to more familiar chaos. As you step out, you hear one last quip echo behind you. At least in here, the heat doesn't talk over you. You don't laugh, but you smile. You try to unwind while a half-naked poet recites Ovid and someone juggles grapes nearby. It's like a chaotic open mic in a sauna. After the gender-bending serenity of the last chamber, you think just maybe the weirdness is winding down.
A drunken man sprawled with a cracked amphora. Late 15th century illuminated manuscript miniature, tempera and shell gold on vellum, flat medieval perspective, fine brown ink outlines, subtle parchment texture, 16.9 aspect, ultra high resolution, 4K, prompt 7. A bald healer poking at a rash with a bronze probe while holding a wine cup. Nervous bather seated, goat tied near a tiled pillar. Late 15th century illuminated manuscript miniature, tempera and shell gold on vellum, flat medieval perspective, fine brown ink outlines, subtle parchment texture, 16.9 aspect, ultra high resolution, 4K, prompt 8. A man rubbing crocodile dung and olive oil onto his chest. Slaves holding tiny clay jars and linen towels. Background arches wreathed in steam. Late 15th century illuminated manuscript miniature. Tempera and shell gold on vellum. Flat medieval perspective. Fine brown ink outlines. Subtle parchment texture. 16.9 aspect.
Because now you find yourself in what can only be described as the Roman equivalent of Bathhouse Cabaret. The desultorium, an informal gathering space at the heart of many thermae, is buzzing. The steam is lighter here, but the drama is heavier. You're greeted by the sharp pluck of a lyre, the thud of someone practicing juggling, and unmistakably, the voice of a man attempting to rhyme Venus with penis in flawless Latin hexameter. You squint toward the raised dais at the far end of the room where a scrawny, half-clothed poet, wild-haired and wildly confident, stands with arms outstretched, declaiming a passage from Ovid's Amores with such passion you'd think he wrote it himself. He probably didn't. Still, the crowd humors him. A small cluster of bathers recline around him like oiled-up theater critics. They nod, sigh, and occasionally snap their fingers, a modern instinct that makes you briefly wonder if time is folding in on itself. You take a seat on a low bench, cautiously avoiding the puddle beside it, which may be either spilled wine or something less poetic, and try to relax. Your muscles are softening, your senses rebooting, and the ambient lyre is oddly soothing until a grape whizzes past your ear and bounces off the wall. You turn. A shirtless teenager with an elaborate braid is juggling a cluster of grapes while balancing on one foot. He grins apologetically and catches the last grape in his mouth with a practiced snap. The small crowd near him erupts into applause. He bows, then does it again. The show must go on. One mainstream historical fact. Roman bathhouses weren't just for bathing. They were entertainment venues. Musicians, poets, acrobats, and dancers often performed in the larger thermae, especially those sponsored by wealthy patrons looking to win public favor. Think of it as a talent show wrapped in a towel floating on a sea of sweat. You notice a woman with a tambourine tapping along to the lyre. A man beside her sings, not badly, a hymn to Bacchus. He holds a cup of wine and sways with the rhythm, spilling more than he drinks. A boy sells roasted nuts from a little tray slung around his neck. You buy a few, mostly because it feels like the right thing to do. They're hot, salty, and you instantly regret eating them in a humid room filled with half-naked strangers. A group of teenage girls in the corner giggles as one of them does impressions of famous philosophers. She nails Seneca's brooding stare and Socrates' squint, complete with a nasal whine. Even you laugh, which earns you a polite wave. One quirky tidbit? Some performers became minor celebrities within the Bathhouse circuit, known for their recitations or juggling or scandalous musical parodies. A few were even hired for private parties held in the after-hours of elite thermi, where wine flowed freely and toga constraints were optional. Still, not everyone loves the entertainment. A grumpy older man near you mutters about the decline of Roman virtue, and when bathhouses were about cleansing, not clowning. He fans himself with a piece of parchment and casts a dark glance toward the jugglers. You nod sympathetically and quietly inch away before he corners you with a 3-hour monologue on the moral downfall of the empire. Historians still argue whether these performances were a welcome escape or a sign of cultural decay. Were the bathhouse theatrics a reflection of Roman openness to art and wit, or simply the soundtrack to societal slippage? Either way, the mosaics don't lie. There are images of musicians, dancers, and drunken actors, all cavorting between the pillars of famous thermi. And the crowd? It's a mix of every class and intention. Senators watch with detached amusement. Merchants laugh too loud. Slaves pretend not to watch but memorize every line. A child claps to the beat of a flute. An old woman corrects a singer's lyrics mid-song. The bathhouse is many things but never boring. Just as the poet hits his final line, a dramatic flourish involving Mars, betrayal, and an overly long metaphor about honeybees, someone lets out a thunderous burp. The crowd laughs. The poet bows. Someone tosses him a date, which he catches and promptly eats without breaking eye contact. You applaud with everyone else, unsure whether you're celebrating the performance or your own endurance. The air buzzes with cheer and citrus. The steam has thinned. Your pulse has steadied. And though you are still towel-clad, slightly oily, and now nursing a mild case of second-hand embarrassment, you are, somehow, at peace. At least until someone announces there's a spontaneous philosophy debate starting next door. Of course there is. Epicurus meets exfoliation, as wealthy Romans discuss death, taxes, and foot fungus in between scrubs. You shuffle into the next chamber hoping for silence, or at the very least something resembling peace. What you get instead is a symposium on metaphysics. Naked. It's the conclavium, one of those unassuming side rooms where philosophical conversation unfolds not over wine and figs, but between bouts of steaming, scraping, and oiling. You catch the tail end of a passionate debate as you ease onto a bench, trying not to interrupt what sounds like a heated argument about whether the soul survives after death, or if it simply evaporates like bathhouse steam. One man, tall and thin with a sharp nose and sharper tone, is quoting Epicurus. He speaks with the poise of someone who's probably never doubted a single opinion he's ever had. The soul, he declares, gesturing with a strigil, is made of atoms just like everything else. It dissipates, gone, like breath in the wind. Another man, pudgy and pink from the caldarium, frowns. Then how do you explain dreams of the dead, Or oracles, or the chill I feel every time I step into this cursed room? There's a general murmur of agreement with the last point. The air here is oddly drafty. You sit back, folding your towel around your waist, pretending you're deeply invested in the marble pattern on the floor. But soon enough, someone turns to you. What say you, stranger? Is death the end, or merely the changing of sandals? You blink. That's a lot of pressure for someone whose primary goal today was not slipping near a fig. I haven't died yet, you say, non-committally. Laughter erupts. Someone claps your back. You're in. Mainstream historical fact. Bathhouses weren't just about hygiene or even pleasure. They were intellectual spaces. Well-educated Romans, especially Stoics and Epicureans, used these public venues to exchange ideas, test arguments, and gently, or not so gently, mock each other's reasoning. Many great Roman thinkers frequented thermae not just to sweat out toxins, but to sharpen their minds. You glance around. Someone is carving a quote from Seneca into the wall with a sharpened reed. Another man is using the surface of a soapstone bench to outline geometric shapes with droplets of oil. One woman, draped in a linen wrap and reeking of lavender, argues that taxation is just a polite form of slavery. No one disagrees. A man with particularly crusty heels interjects. And what of the gods, eh? If the soul is gone, are they just fancy statues? Someone snorts. All I know is that Mars hasn't helped me with my foot fungus. A spirited discussion follows about divine intervention and foot conditions. One quirky tidbit: Romans often believed certain ailments could be caused or cured by divine favor. The goddess Salus, patroness of public health, was frequently invoked in bathhouse prayers. Some people even left small votive offerings in nooks or fountains, miniature legs, arms, ears, all carved in clay, to thank the gods for healing or to beg for it. You glance around and notice one such offering, a tiny terracotta nose, perched respectfully next to a basin of steaming water. The debate continues. A young man with tousled curls references Plato, claiming that true knowledge comes from the soul remembering past lives. An older woman scoffs and mutters something about Plato never having to soak next to a pickpocket. Historians still argue whether these philosophical gatherings were earnest forums of exchange or just another flex for Rome's intellectual elite. Did people really learn here, or was it about being seen thinking aloud, showing off just enough wisdom to impress while scratching your armpits with a golden strigil? Either way, the performance is mesmerizing. One bather balances on one foot while reciting a syllogism. Another performs a short parody of Aristotle, complete with a fake beard made of sponge. The laughter is hearty, the arguments sharp. You find yourself lulled by the rhythm of it, the ebb and flow of heated thought cooled by the splash of water and the occasional fart. Philosophy does not pause for digestion. Someone nudges you again. What do you believe? The lavender woman asks. Is virtue a thing of the mind or of the body? You consider the room, steamy, fragrant, buzzing with thought and bacteria, and you say, both. If your back's out, it's hard to be virtuous. More laughter. Another clap on the back. You're officially part of the symposium now. And yet, as the discussion circles back to whether Caesar is a tyrant or a tragic idealist, you feel your thoughts drift, not to politics or Plato, but to the cool plunge you left behind. Your skin prickles again, the oils are drying, your stomach gurgles. You've been in this bathhouse for hours. Your body is tired, your mind is full. Your towel is damp, and they've just begun a new debate on whether dreams can predict the forum's next market collapse. You slip out before someone asks for your opinion on the Iliad. Beneath your feet, soot-covered slaves stoke fires endlessly. Their world is darker and far more brutal than your steamy surface stroll. As you step away from the philosophical fray, a sense of weight creeps back in. The bathhouse is still buzzing, still full of noise and heat, but something's changed. Your body feels lighter, less burdened by the grime of the streets. You've scrubbed yourself clean, you've socialized, you've even survived a cold plunge. But underneath it all, there's a gnawing realization. For all the luxury of the surface experience, there's a darker world that makes this all possible. You venture deeper into the bathhouse, following the maze of corridors, when you suddenly catch a whiff of something that's not steam or incense, something thick, oily, and heavy. You pause, scanning the room. The deeper chambers are quieter, with fewer bathers. The light shifts, there's less bright marble and more shadow. You find yourself near the Hierarchies system, an underground furnace that powers the entire bathhouse. The air is thick with the stench of burning wood and coal, and the heat here is not the gentle, seductive warmth of the tepidarium. No, this heat is brutal, the kind that can make you lightheaded with just a glance. Beneath the marble floors, slaves toil in these suffocating chambers, feeding the fires that maintain the warmth and steam of every room above. Here there's no room for luxury or relaxation. The world beneath the bathhouse is one of sweat, soot, and ceaseless labor. You imagine these slaves, their faces hollowed by exhaustion, working around the clock, shoveling coal and wood into the roaring flames, stoking the fires without pause, without end. They are the true backbone of the thermi, their lives dictated by the relentless demands of heat, the cold iron of the furnace, and the need to serve an empire of indulgence. It's easy to forget their existence when you're lounging in the caldarium or relishing your soft skin after the frigidarium. But down here, the stifling air is a reminder that while you've been soaking in warmth, someone else has been sweating their life away in the shadows. You watch for a moment, your thoughts turning to the paradox of it all. The bathhouse is a place for leisure, for cleansing, for the body and mind, but it's also built on the unyielding labor of others, the slaves who work in the depths of the furnace, their sweat mingling with the soot and smoke that powers the empire's most indulgent spaces. One mainstream historical fact: the hypocaust was an incredibly sophisticated heating system, one of Rome's greatest engineering marvels. Beneath the floors of the baths, hot air from furnaces circulated through channels, keeping the rooms at a constant temperature. This technology was so advanced that it inspired later systems of underfloor heating in Europe, though those systems lacked the relentless human labor that powered them. You'd glance at a pair of slaves working nearby, their movements mechanical, their faces obscured by the grime and heat. One pauses, wipes his brow, and reaches for another chunk of coal. His skin glistens with sweat, his body covered in soot. There's no grand performance for him, no acrobats or poets, just fire and heat and the constant rhythm of stoking the furnaces that fuel someone else's comfort. A moment later, you hear the rustling of feet behind you. You turn, and a slave in a ragged tunic stands there, holding a bucket of water. He nods toward the furnace room and gestures to a few other workers. It's their break, a few minutes to catch their breath before the next round of work begins. It's the briefest of respites. They'll return to the furnace, stoking the flames that drive the bathhouse's heat, all while you wander in comfort above. Historians still argue whether the labor of slaves in the bathhouse systems was as brutal as it seems. Some say the work was grueling but necessary to keep the empire's elite comfortable, while others suggest that the slaves were often treated relatively well, especially when compared to the harsh realities of agricultural labor. But there's no denying the inequality that shaped the thermi. You pull your gaze away from the furnace, feeling the weight of their lives in the pit of your stomach. The bathhouse's indulgence is built on their exhaustion, their silence, and yet, here you are, walking freely, with only your own concerns to guide you. You leave the furnace area behind, the sound of crackling fires echoing in your ears as you step back into the bustling, carefree thermae. You return to the soft steam, the gentle clink of coins and the chatter of bathers. But something has shifted in you. The weight of luxury feels a little heavier now. You move on, knowing that though the surface remains warm, the depths are darker, and someone, somewhere, is stoking the flames to keep you warm. You're told the waters cure everything from gout to bad poetry, but archaeologists still debate whether they spread disease faster than gossip. After the oppressive heat of the furnace room, you step into another part of the thermae, seeking solace in the calm of the next chamber. This one is slightly cooler, but the buzz of conversation still hums in the background. The high-pitched laughter of bathers mixing with the soothing splash of water creates a peculiar rhythm, a soothing undercurrent to the ever-present buzz of life. You move toward the large central pool, the one many bathhouses are built around. It's filled with an abundance of warm water, shimmering under the dim, flickering light from torches. On the surface, a few bathers swim lazily or float on their backs, chatting with friends, while others recline along the edges, their legs stretched out. The scent of lavender and mint mingles with the lingering smell of oil and sweat. The water here is reputed to have curative properties, soothing to the skin, relaxing for the muscles, and a remedy for nearly every ailment under the Roman sun. You've heard stories from bathers claiming that the waters could cure gout, indigestion, sore feet, and even a broken heart. Some have even attributed healing qualities to the warmth of the water itself, believing it to be a divine gift from the gods. There's something else in the water. As you slip your foot in, you realize that it feels almost too slippery. The surface isn't smooth, but rather gritty, the bottom lined with fine layers of dirt, oil, and the remnants of other bathers' skin cells. You immediately feel a rush of discomfort, but you press on. In the world of Roman hygiene, everything from the air to the water could be viewed as therapeutic. So why not this? There's a story about the Romans' early use of public baths and how the baths were often a gathering place for all types of people. From politicians to poets, soldiers to slaves, the baths were a place where class distinctions blurred, and socializing was as much a part of the experience as the bathing itself. And yet, the reality of these spaces was often much darker. One quirky tidbit? Some bathhouses, especially the most luxurious, actually filtered their water with sand and charcoal, attempting to make it cleaner for the bathers. But others, especially the more crowded ones, likely harbored a fair share of bacteria. Roman bathhouses, in fact, were notorious for spreading disease. Roman historians note that during certain outbreaks of plague, bathhouses were one of the primary places for the contagion to spread rapidly, as the close proximity of bathers and the shared nature of the water made it an ideal breeding ground for illness. Historians still argue over the true extent to which Roman baths contributed to the spread of disease. Some believe the baths were a source of serious outbreaks, while others claim that the practice of regular bathing, alongside other hygiene habits, was actually beneficial in preventing many common ailments. The reality is likely somewhere in between, but the concept of disease in the baths was clearly a concern. Some bathers were known to wear a mixture of sulfur and vinegar to protect themselves from evil airs and infection. But for now, you push these thoughts aside. You dip your other foot into the water, closing your eyes for a moment and allowing yourself to just float with the current as the warm water licks at your skin. In this moment, you can almost forget about the sweat, the oils, the crowded rooms, the roving hands, and the whispered scandals. Here, it's just you and the water, holding you close and offering you its warmth. No questions asked. Yet even as you settle into the serenity of the moment, a thought nags at you. What did the Romans truly know about cleanliness? Did they even understand the health risks they were exposing themselves to? How much was myth? How much was reality? The debate rages on in the background as another bather swims past you with an air of superiority, clearly someone who has mastered the art of casual relaxation. He raises an eyebrow at you as if to say, "Why aren't you at ease yet? Maybe you never will be." A sudden shift of the water draws your attention. Someone nearby coughs, and the sound rings through the pool's hollowed-out walls. You turn just in time to see a bather cough into the water, no hand, no consideration. Another person nearby laughs, loud and obnoxious, and you realize you've crossed the line from relaxation to awareness. Historians still debate whether the Romans really valued cleanliness or whether it was mostly about appearance. Were they truly obsessed with hygiene, or was it all a game of social performance, a way to keep up appearances while indulging in excess? The water ripples around you as another bather moves in your direction, and you think about the long history of the bathhouses and their place in Roman society. Were these places sacred temples to cleanliness, or were they just another manifestation of an empire that took everything to excess? You lean back against the edge of the pool, closing your eyes again, and let the weight of the water press down on you. Your mind wanders. Even Rome's poorest citizens could bathe, but the cheap seats had fungus, graffiti, and a distinct whiff of despair. You push yourself up from the warm water, the faint squelch of your skin against the slick marble serving as a reminder that your time here is almost done. You slowly make your way toward the far end of the frigidarium, now feeling the weight of the experience settle into your bones. There's a sense of relief, at least for your muscles, but something about the whole affair feels incomplete, a little unsatisfying. You've been in luxury, you've been in squalor, and now, as you step closer to the final part of the bathhouse, you're drawn into a much grimmer reality, the pessima pars, or worst part of the bathhouse. It's easy to forget, tucked away in the serene warmth of the luxury baths or the playful indulgence of the caldarium, that the public baths were for everyone. Even the lowest members of society could partake, though in many cases they found themselves in the cheapest, least hygienic corners of the complex. You enter a small room, dimly lit by only a few flickering torches. The air is thick and wet, and the floors here feel slick and dangerous underfoot, not from the luxury of oil, but from the grime of countless feet that have walked this way before. The smell hits you instantly, damp, sour, and musty. It's not the comforting smell of warm herbs or sweetly perfumed oils. No, this is a room of decay. This is the cheap seats. The Romans called them calidarii inferior, places where the poorest citizens, and by extension the most desperate, bathed. These were the chambers you didn't advertise. They were rarely discussed in the higher circles of Roman society, yet they were where the majority of the populace spent their bathhouse time. No marble floors, no polished walls. The water here was murky and grimy, swirling with the leftovers from the wealthier pools. No fragrant oils or calming incense, just the faint, disturbing smell of sweat, dirt, and mildew. A few bathers move through the space, hunched under towels that hang from their bodies like ragged flags. You hear hacking coughs, soft mutters about sick children, and the shuffle of sandals over the wet stone. Nearby, a man scratches at his foot, revealing a red, inflamed patch of skin, likely from some infection. His eyes are downcast. He knows better than to draw attention to himself. You look away. One mainstream historical fact. Roman bathhouses were supposed to be accessible to all citizens, regardless of wealth. This, in theory, provided a level of hygiene and a sense of equality across class lines. But the reality was more complex. The wealthy had access to the finest bathhouses, where the air was carefully controlled, the water was pure, and the atmosphere was designed for luxury. The poor, on the other hand, had to make do with overcrowded, poorly maintained facilities. The price of entry was minimal, but the cost to their dignity was steep. The most distressing part of this area isn't the obvious lack of comfort or cleanliness. It's the complete lack of privacy. The room is a jumble of bodies crowded together in the same space, each person forced to perform their most basic human act under the eyes of others. There's a sense of disempowerment here, a stark contrast to the grandeur of the caldarium or the peace of the tepidarium. In this chamber, no one is a senator, a poet, or an entertainer. Here, everyone is just a body, sweating, itching, suffering. You step past a corner where a small, sad fountain trickles water, likely sourced from the same system as the wealthy pools, but this one is thick with debris and moss. A bit of algae floats on the surface, barely moving. The water is stagnant here. You notice the faint outlines of graffiti scrawled into the walls. Some of it is crude. The gods are watching, but the walls are more interesting. Others are a bit more desperate. I will die here, but so will they. A shiver runs down your spine as you realize these bathhouses weren't just places for leisure. They were places where the hidden poverty of Rome simmered beneath the surface. The very concept of public bathing, which on the surface seemed so generous, was marred by the reality that the least fortunate were often left to suffer in substandard conditions. You glance at your own skin, now slightly pruned from the warm water, and wonder if the grime and bacteria on your body is any different from theirs. You're part of the system now, too, enjoying the warmth, the luxury, the calm of the baths, while others are relegated to the corners, to the shadows of the empire. A quirky tidbit: bathhouse slaves, some of whom were assigned to the poorer areas, were often treated worse than the patrons. They were tasked with maintaining the pools and cleaning the common areas, sometimes enduring harsh working conditions. They too were caught in the same cycle of poverty, forever working to clean up what was left behind by a system that only valued the comfort of the elite. As you leave this grim space and step back into the light, you find yourself more aware than before of the disparity that rests at the heart of this city. You've glimpsed the darker side of the Thermae, the part that the wealthy rarely spoke about, and the part that remains hidden in the shadows of the empire. The bathhouse was never just a sanctuary for the soul or a place for relaxation. It was a reflection of Rome's greatest contradiction, a place of public health built on inequality. You step back into the more bustling, clean spaces of the bathhouse, feeling lighter in body but heavier in spirit. The mix of oils, sweat, mildew, urine, and burnt incense creates a perfume that'll haunt your dreams. You feel your heart slow down as you finally leave the grimy corners of the bathhouse behind, but your mind remains troubled. The oppressive weight of the lower chambers lingers, a reminder of the unseen parts of this vast empire. You move toward a final area of the bathhouse, one last stop before the end of your journey. It's a strange, paradoxical space, a room that reeks of both indulgence and discomfort. As you enter the new chamber, the smell hits you first. It's an odd blend. Burnt incense, yes, but also something sour, something vaguely metallic. Urine, likely, and the smell of sweat that's been left to linger too long. There's a faint, unpleasant mildew in the air, the residue of long hours of soaking and skin-to-skin contact. The entire atmosphere is thick, cloying, like the worst part of any public space where the accumulation of bodies is too much for the air to bear. A mix of burned oils, sweat from the upper classes, mildew from the lower, and just the faintest hint of ode to ancient Roman, that's what lingers in the air. You wonder if it's too much, if the smells are too overpowering, but you push the thought away. You've seen so much today, the disparity between the opulence of the tepidarium and the squalor of the lesser areas. Now, the lingering scent of sweat and oil seems to connect it all, pulling it together like an inescapable thread. The soft plink of water drops in the corner reminds you that the bathhouse never stops, never rests. Somewhere, someone is scrubbing their skin with an ancient concoction of olive oil and sea salt, their body part of a ritual, an experience that's existed for centuries. You wonder if, after a few hours, all the scents and sensations fade into the background, if people simply forget about them, or maybe they just learn to accept it, because what else can you do when surrounded by so much humanity? In the distance, you spot a group of bathers engaged in a conversation about politics, no doubt discussing the latest scandal in the Senate. Shakes out a towel, dislodging a cloud of dust from a bench. His movements are slow, deliberate, as though he too is feeling the weight of the day. Another man lounges by the pool, eyes closed, the soft ripple of water the only sound filling the silence. His body is a mass of glistening oils and well-worn leather, the embodiment of everything Rome wants to be, untouched, eternal, perfect. You watch him for a moment and wonder if, in his state of leisure, he's thinking about anything at all, or if he's simply dissolved into the bathhouse, one body in a sea of many. The steam swirls around you, dense with history. You look around, scanning the room. This place isn't as busy as the caldarium, nor as isolated as the lower chambers. It's a space where everyone who's been through the other parts of the bathhouse ends up, relaxed, cleansed, somewhat changed, but still utterly human. Some sit in pools of cool water, their skin soft but with a dull sheen from the oils they've been covered in. Others relax on stone benches, letting the warmth settle into their bones. A few quietly speak, though the conversation is low, muted by the oppressive air. You wonder how often these bathhouses see the end of their patron's day. The indulgence of a public bath is a long experience, the hours dragging by like the flow of water, and though you've seen it all, felt it all, there's still a lingering sense of something unfinished. Maybe it's the smells, those potent, inescapable fragrances, those earthy bodily scents that swirl around you like the last traces of a forgotten dream. Or maybe it's the knowledge that for all the cleanliness you've experienced, there's always a shadow here, always the reminder that the bathhouse, for all its luxury, is just a temporary escape from the mess of life outside. You finally decide to leave this strange chamber, knowing the time has come. You're not sure if you feel refreshed, or if you simply feel cleansed in the way that only time and water can manage. Your skin is softer, though perhaps no cleaner than before. You've walked through the labyrinth of luxury and squalor, felt the tension between history and indulgence, and now, as you step toward the exit, you feel the weight of your journey, the layers of bathhouse life that you've absorbed. One quirky tidbit: the Romans had an odd way of washing their hands after they'd finished with their oils, usually with a mixture of vinegar and salt water. It was said to remove any lingering fragrances, or perhaps just mask them with something sharper. You can't help but wonder if this strange ritual was just another attempt to erase the very scent of what they were. You step out, leaving behind the labyrinth of steamy chambers, and take a final breath, hoping it's the one that stays with you. The lingering aroma of history, the faint echo of baths long forgotten. The mix of oils and sweat forms a perfume that'll haunt your dreams. You exit the bathhouse, stepping back into the Roman streets, the familiar bustle of the city immediately replacing the surreal quiet of the thermae. The air feels colder now, biting at your damp skin and reminding you of the strange contrast between the luxurious heat you just left behind and the harsh reality of the world outside. The memory of the bathhouse lingers like an invisible cloak, heavy, warm, and sticky. The smells cling to you, curling in your hair, on your skin, making you hyper-aware of the grime and oil that seems impossible to scrub away. You try to shake it off, but it's not that simple. The bathhouse has a way of getting under your skin, embedding itself in your memory like the faintest trace of perfume, lingering long after the last drop of water has been wiped away. As you make your way through the streets, your senses are overwhelmed. The sounds of the bustling market around you, the vendors shouting their wares, the clink of coins, the clip-clop of sandals, now seem sharper, more invasive. The city feels different somehow, like you've crossed a threshold you didn't know was there. You pass by a group of women, their bodies draped in flowing stolae, and for a moment you notice the subtle shifts in their posture. It's not just the weight of their togas, the burden of the day. It's the aftermath of the bathhouse, too. You see it in the way they walk, the slight ease in their movements, as if they've just stepped out of a private sanctuary, one where the rules of the world don't apply. It's a look that comes with the luxury of indulgence, and you realize that just for a few hours you were part of it. But the outside world doesn't wait. You notice the dust on your sandals and the faint sheen of oil on your skin as you pass a polished marble fountain. The streets are full of life, full of work. The heat and the relaxation of the thermae are already fading in the face of the empire's ceaseless pace. A group of men in togas stand nearby, gesturing animatedly as they argue over the latest political scandal. You overhear snippets, something about a failed military campaign, a senator's supposed treasonous activities. But it's hard to focus on their words when your mind is still swimming in the water, the oils, the smells. The bathhouse has left its mark on you. One quirky detail? Romans were known for their ability to compartmentalize. The bathhouse, for all its public nature, was a private escape, a world within the world. Afterward, they would return to their ordinary lives, as if nothing had changed. But for you, the line between what's real and what was the thermi begins to blur. How much of this city is just surface? How much of it is hidden beneath the layers? The sounds of the city begin to feel muffled, like you're still submerged in water, the air thick with the steam of the caldarium. You breathe deeply, trying to recalibrate, but your body feels heavy, slow. The perfume of the bathhouse still clings to you, threading its way into the noise of the streets like an unsolvable riddle. Historians often debate the true effect of public bathing on Roman society, whether it was an essential social practice, a tool of civic unity, or simply another form of indulgence. What's undeniable is that the bathhouse was a symbol of Rome's complexity. It was a place of cleansing and contamination, of leisure and labor. It was a microcosm of the empire itself, luxurious on the surface, grim beneath. And as you walk through the streets of Rome, feeling both light and burdened, you realize something. The bathhouse wasn't just a place to wash off the day. It was a place that left a mark, a scar, one that you'll carry with you, hidden under your skin. You turn a corner and find yourself looking up at the towering walls of a nearby temple, the weight of the empire in its stone pillars. It's a familiar sight now, but somehow it feels different. The city that was once just a backdrop to your experience now seems to be pushing at you from all sides, as though the bathhouse's grip on your senses will never quite let go. The scent of the oil still clings to you, the sweat of the caldarium still on your skin, and the laughter and debate of the frigidarium echo in your mind. You take another step forward, and in that moment you understand. The bathhouse wasn't just about hygiene or luxury or socializing. It was about how we leave our mark on our bodies, our minds, our world, and some marks never fade. You stumble out, dehydrated, dazed, and wondering why your skin smells like pork fat and regret. The sunlight hits you like a slap. After hours shrouded in mist, marble, and murmurs, the Roman street outside feels too bright, too loud, too real. The sounds of the city crash over you, carts rumbling, hawkers shouting, sandals slapping stone, and it's disorienting, like waking from a fever dream. Your senses, dulled by heat and oils, struggle to readjust. You tighten your damp, wilted tunic. It clings to you in strange places. Every inch of your skin is either too dry or too slimy. Somewhere between the strigil scraping, the vinegar rinse, and the crocodile dung, you've managed to develop a scent that could politely be described as barbecued goat with herbal undertones. You turn a corner and lean against a shaded wall, catching your breath. Your legs are weak, rubbery from hot water and too much standing. Your head buzzes from the temperature shifts. A fig pit is somehow still lodged in your sandal. You exhale slowly. People brush past you with barely a glance. Bathhouse regulars, no doubt. Veterans. They move briskly, oiled and unbothered, already blending back into the rhythm of daily Roman life. One man is adjusting his belt while arguing about grain prices. Another woman is brushing lavender into her hair while scolding a child for picking at his scabs. You, on the other hand, are still reeling. You thought the bathhouse would be a place of calm, of rest, maybe even indulgence. Instead, it was an arena, one where you had to survive heat, strangers, philosophical debates, fungal spores, unsolicited poetry, and a man who offered you a wine enema with way too much eye contact. You glance down at your skin. It's pink, pruned, raw in some places. Your feet are still a little slimy. You smell like you've been slow cooked in oil and disappointment. And worse, your coin pouch is still missing. A souvenir of Rome's finest pickpockets, no doubt. One mainstream historical fact. For many Romans, this bathhouse ritual was a daily occurrence. They did this every day, before business, after work, sometimes multiple times. To them, the thermae weren't extreme. They were normal, just part of the rhythm of being alive in the empire. But for you, it's been a gauntlet. And you know what's strange? You might do it again. There's something about the chaos, the absurdity, the wild humanity of it all, the rawness of the experience. For all its sweat, strangeness, and barely sanitized surfaces, the bathhouse forces you to feel your body, your thoughts, the people around you. There's no hiding behind robes or etiquette. You're just you, stripped down and plunged into Rome, fully immersed. One quirky tidbit. Some Romans believed the thermae were a kind of purgatory, a liminal space between the chaos of life and the clarity of death, that when you entered, you shed the world for a few hours, and when you exited, you re-emerged as something else, a little lighter, a little emptier, maybe a little wiser, maybe just more dehydrated. Historians still argue whether bathhouses were truly democratic, whether the idea of shared space actually leveled status, or if it just looked like equality while preserving all the old hierarchies under a slick layer of olive oil. But standing here now, sticky, broke, exhausted, you understand something no book can teach. Rome didn't care if you survived the bathhouse. It just expected you to show up. You take a breath, deep, shaky, and begin walking. Your shadow stretches before you, long and pale under the afternoon sun. You feel every muscle. You taste the salt still drying on your lips. The bathhouse is behind you, but it follows, in the way your joints creak, in the whispers still echoing in your ears, in the scent that lingers no matter how many times you wipe your hands on your tunic. You are no longer who you were when you stepped in. You are, whether you like it or not, a little more Roman. Now, as the city softens around you and the memory of the bathhouse begins to fade, let yourself settle. Other feet still ache. Your skin still hums. But the world is quieter now. The crowds thin as the sun dips low behind terracotta roofs, casting long shadows down worn cobblestone alleys. A breeze slips past, a cool one this time, and it brushes against your damp hair like a whispered apology. You walk slower now. Not because you're tired, though you are, but because you've been through something. Not something grand, not some battlefield or chariot race, but something strangely intimate. You were peeled, scrubbed, steamed, cooled, watched, and ignored. You were just a body in a room of other bodies, held together by heat and water and the simple, messy rituals of being human. Let your breathing slow. Let your shoulders ease down. That bathhouse, absurd and overwhelming as it was, did something to you. Not just to your skin or your pulse, but to your rhythm. You're moving differently now, a little softer, a little slower, a little more aware of the sounds and smells and small textures that make up a life. You step away from the street into a quieter corner and sit. The marble is warm beneath you. You close your eyes, and for the briefest moment you feel it again. The steam, the the oil, the hum of distant voices, and maybe, just maybe, you understand why the Romans did it every day, not in spite of the discomfort, but because of it. Remember, some parts of you need to be unraveled, wrung out, and warmed before they can rest. Sleep well, traveler. Let your mind float. The baths are behind you now, and all is calm.